The numbers never lied. That was the thing about spreadsheets. They didn't have feelings, they didn't have opinions, and they absolutely did not care that your landlord had just texted to say the building had been sold and your lease wasn't being renewed. Marisol Vega found that out on a Tuesday. The text came in at 8:47 in the morning, while she was standing in the hallway of Whitmore Financial Group in downtown Vancouver, holding a cardboard box that contained her entire professional life. 2 pens, a charging cable, a mug that said "World's Okayest Accountant" that her mother had given her as a joke, and 6 years of silence about everything she'd seen. 6 years. She'd kept her head down. She'd done the books. She'd caught errors that other people missed and fixed them quietly. Because that was what you did when you were grateful to have a job and you weren't entirely sure your work visa paperwork was as solid as HR had claimed. She hadn't asked questions. She hadn't made waves. She had, in the language of every performance review she'd ever received, been a team player. And then Derek Whitmore had promoted his nephew, 23 years old, couldn't read a balance sheet if his car payment depended on it, to senior analyst. And Marisol had made the mistake of saying so, politely, in an email. With data attached, the box in her arms was the response to that email. She didn't cry in the elevator, she cried in the parkade stairwell, which was private and smelled like motor oil, and nobody could see her. She let herself have exactly 4 minutes. She timed it on her phone, and then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, picked up the box, and walked to her car. The landlord text was still on her phone screen when she got there. Possession required by end of month. Thank you for your tenancy. Marisol sat in the driver's seat of her 2009 Honda Civic and stared at the concrete wall in front of her for a long moment. Okay, she thought. Okay, so that's where we are. She had 11 days until end of month. She had 3 months of savings, which had seemed responsible 6 weeks ago and now felt like a cruel joke. She had a mother in Calgary who would absolutely take her in and also absolutely never let her forget it, and a brother in Kelowna who had 4 kids under 7 and no spare room, and a LinkedIn profile that currently described her as open to opportunities, which was the professional equivalent of screaming into the void. She started the car. She didn't go home. There was no particular reason. She just found herself driving east along Hastings, then south, then nowhere in particular, the way you do when your body understands that sitting still is not actually an option right now. The box was on the passenger seat. The mug was sliding around every time she turned a corner. She ended up in a coffee shop on Main Street that she'd never been to before, the kind with exposed brick and too many plants and a chalkboard menu with 12 different words for oat milk. She ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a plain Americano, $4, and took a table in the back corner and opened her laptop. She needed a job, obviously. She needed to be systematic about this, because systematic was what she did, and panic was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. She opened a spreadsheet. She typed job search tracker at the top in bold. She created columns for company name, role, application date, contact, and follow-up status. She stared at the empty rows. She typed in 1 application. She stared at that, too. The woman at the next table was on a phone call, talking loudly about someone named Brandon who had apparently done something unforgivable at a cottage last weekend. Marisol didn't catch the details, but the tone was clear enough. Some betrayals had a specific frequency, a pitch just below outrage, just above grief, and she recognized it the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. She thought about Derek Whitmore's nephew, sitting in the senior analyst chair. She thought about the email she'd sent. With respect, the Q3 reconciliation contains a material discrepancy in the trust account allocations that I believe warrants a second review. Careful language, documented evidence. She'd even said, with respect, she'd been so careful. She closed the laptop without saving. The walk back to her car took her past an employment agency she'd never noticed before, the kind with a small sign and frosted glass on the 2nd floor above a dry cleaner. Something about the sign caught her eye. Not flashy. Just Revel placement, specialized staffing for financial and operations roles. She photographed it. She didn't know why. That night she applied to 11 jobs from her kitchen table with a bowl of instant noodles going cold beside her. She applied to a property management company, a logistics firm, 2 credit unions, a family office downtown that needed someone to handle their books, and 6 others she barely remembered by the time she was done. She fell asleep at her laptop and woke up at 3 a.m. with her face on the keyboard and typed in the salary expectations field. She deleted it. She submitted the application anyway. Revel Placement called her the next morning. The woman on the phone had a clipped, efficient voice that reminded Marisol of someone who had never been uncertain about anything in her life. She said her name was Fenwick, just Fenwick, no first name offered, and she said she'd received Marisol's resume from one of the job boards and she had a role she thought might be a fit. What kind of role? Marisol asked. She was standing in her kitchen in yesterday's clothes, holding her phone with both hands for no rational reason. Financial oversight. A private client. The work itself is straightforward. Reconciling accounts, tracking expenditures, flagging irregularities. The unusual part is the environment. The client operates outside conventional corporate structures, Fenwick said, in the same tone someone might use to describe a slightly eccentric office culture, like casual Fridays or a kombucha tap. His operations are extensive and he requires someone with a specific combination of discretion and competence. You have both. Based on what I've reviewed, how do you know I have discretion? Because you were at Whitmore Financial for 6 years and you're only leaving now, Fenwick said. That tells me something. Marisol thought about that. What's the pay? Fenwick told her. Marisol sat down on her kitchen floor. Not because she needed to, just because her knees had made the decision independently. The number was not an accounting salary. The number was a what kind of operation is this salary? The number was enough to cover her rent for a year. Up front, in the 3 months it would take a normal person to do the same job. I'd need to know more, she said. Of course, Fenwick said. I'll send you the NDA first. The NDA arrived in her inbox 40 seconds later. Marisol read every word of it. She was not the kind of person who skipped NDAs. The language was precise, layered, and written by someone who thought in contingencies. There were clauses she'd never seen before. One that specifically addressed what happened if she became aware of activities that were adjacent to, but not directly in violation of certain categories of law. The phrasing was extraordinary. She read that clause 3 times. She signed it anyway. The interview was at an address in Yaletown, a building with no visible signage, a lobby that contained 1 security desk, 1 camera in each corner, and a man behind the desk who looked at her like she was a variable he was assessing before entering her into a calculation. He took her ID, he made a phone call, he pointed at the elevator without speaking. The office was on the 14th floor and it had a view of False Creek that probably cost more per square foot than Marisol's entire apartment. There was a glass desk, a white couch, and nothing personal anywhere. No photos, no plants, no sign that a human being had ever experienced an emotion in this room. Just documents, stacks of them, but organized with a logic she could almost see from where she was standing. She was looking at the stacks when the door behind her opened. She turned around. The man who walked in was not what she'd pictured. She'd pictured someone who matched the office, polished, contained, aggressively groomed. This man was wearing a dark jacket that looked like it had been slept in, and there were circles under his eyes that spoke of a specific kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than not enough sleep. He was tall. He had a scar that ran from his left jaw down toward his collar, half hidden. He moved like someone who had learned to be very careful about how much space he occupied, and then had unlearned it. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Mrs. Vega?" he said. His voice was lower than she expected, and quieter. "That's me," she said. Unnecessary confirmation of an obvious fact. Excellent start. He sat down across from her without offering a handshake or a name, which told her 2 things. He already knew who she was, and he wasn't particularly concerned about whether she knew who he was. He opened one of the folders from the desk. "You caught a discrepancy in a trust account reconciliation at Whitmore," he said. It wasn't a question. Material. The kind that could have flagged a regulatory review. Yes. And rather than report it externally, you raised it internally. Yes. Why? Marisol considered her answer for exactly as long as she needed to, because I wasn't sure yet what it meant. Numbers out of place don't always mean what they look like. They mean. I wanted to understand it before I made it someone else's problem. He looked at her for a moment. Not the assessing look of the man downstairs. This was something else, like he was recalibrating something. My name is Faraday, he said. Liam Faraday. You won't find that associated with most of what I do. That's intentional. Okay, she said. The role is real. The work is what Fenwick described. I have significant financial operations that require someone who can read accounts the way you apparently read accounts, not just for accuracy, but for pattern. For what's missing as much as what's there. He paused. What I do is not legal in all the ways that word usually applies. I'm not going to tell you it is. But the work I'm asking you to do, the books, the oversight, the reconciliation, that part is simply maths, she said. If you stay, you'll know things. The NDA covers what happens with those things. There's a clause in the NDA, Marisol said, about activities adjacent to certain legal categories. Yes, that's a very careful way to describe something. I'm told I'm careful, he said. Who told you that? The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more reluctant than that. People who were surprised by it, he said. She asked him 3 more questions, all practical. Payment structure, point of contact. What happened if she found something that crossed from adjacent into actual? He answered all 3 directly, which she hadn't expected. She'd expected redirection, or that particular kind of corporate vagueness that meant we'll get to that later, and never did. He didn't do any of that. She said she'd think about it. She thought about it for 6 hours. She walked around the seawall. She called her mother, and had a conversation that touched on the job but not the specifics, which her mother accepted with the particular grace of someone who had learned not to ask questions she didn't want answered. She sat on a bench near Granville Island and watched a guy fail to parallel park for 11 minutes, and felt, for some reason, a profound sense of solidarity with him. Then she called Fenwick and said yes. The work was, as Faraday had promised, simply maths. Or it was, at first. Marisol was given a small office on the same floor, access to 3 sets of accounts under different entity names, and a set of guidelines so precise they were almost beautiful. She understood within the first week why someone with Faraday's interests needed a person like her. The accounts were complicated, not because they were designed to hide things. They weren't, particularly, but because they existed in a kind of parallel architecture, a shadow ledger that ran alongside legitimate business operations and needed to breathe with them, in sync. It was the most interesting accounting work she'd ever done. She didn't say that out loud. It seemed like a strange thing to admit about the financial operations of what she was becoming increasingly certain was a significant criminal organization. But there it was. Faraday himself was in the office 3 or 4 days a week. He didn't hover. He didn't ask her how things were going, or whether she needed anything, or make the particular kind of meaningless small talk that office environments usually required. He passed her desk, sometimes. He read documents. He made phone calls in a language she didn't recognize. Not French, not Spanish. Something harder. They spoke about the books. Only the books. He would come to her office in the afternoon, sometimes, and look at whatever she had on her screen, and she would explain what she'd found or what she was working through, and he would ask questions that were always more perceptive than she expected. The variance in the Meridian account, he said once, 2 weeks in, standing at her shoulder looking at her monitor. You've flagged it but not resolved it. I know what it is, she said. I'm just deciding what to do about it. Tell me what it is. Someone's been skimming, she said. Small amounts, irregular intervals. Patterns designed to look like processing errors, but it's not. It's too consistent to be errors and too irregular to be anything I'm supposed to know about. There was a silence. You're right, Faraday said. I know. I'll handle it. Okay, she said. Should I flag it in the ledger or pretend I didn't see it? He looked at her. Flag it, he said. That's what you're here for. She didn't ask what handling it meant. She had the feeling she already knew. in the way you sometimes know things you haven't been told directly. She flagged the variance. She moved on. The skimming stopped. She flagged 3 other things in the following 6 weeks. Faraday handled all of them. He never explained and she never asked. And somewhere in that particular silence a kind of working understanding grew up between them. Not friendship, not warmth exactly, more like the thing that happens when 2 people discover they are operating from a compatible logic. She still called him Faraday. Everyone else in the operation, she noticed, called him Mr. Faraday or Sir, in the careful register of people who are aware of what happens when careless things happen around careful people. But she'd started with his last name because that was how he'd introduced himself, and it had stayed. He never asked her to change it. One Thursday afternoon in October, she was deep in a reconciliation that had a gap she couldn't account for, not wrong exactly, just unresolved, like a sentence with no ending, and said, "Are you going to be much longer?" "Depends," she said, not looking up. "Is this a wrap-it-up question or an I-need-the-room question?" "Neither," he said. "I have a dinner meeting at 7 and my usual person isn't available. I need someone who can sit at a table and listen and not say anything she shouldn't." Marisol looked up. "Your usual person. She handles certain logistics. She's in Montreal, and you want me to be a replacement logistical dinner person. I want you to come to dinner," he said, which was slightly different, but he didn't elaborate. She went. The restaurant was the kind of place where they don't put the prices on the menu, which Marisol had always found philosophically objectionable. If you have to ask, you're supposed to feel embarrassed, which seemed like a very specific kind of cruelty. She noticed this and noted it mentally, but said nothing. The dinner was with 2 men who were introduced to her only by first names, Benedict and Strand, and a woman named Albrecht who did not smile once and ordered water with the authority of someone who had never in her life been denied anything. Marisol ate her duck confit and listened to a conversation that was conducted almost entirely in implication, the way people speak when they've been in the same world long enough that they no longer need to say the actual words. She caught most of it. The texture of what they were really discussing was familiar to her. She'd spent 6 years in corporate accounting, where the real conversation almost never matched the official one. At one point, Benedict made a remark that was almost certainly intended to be funny, and the table laughed, and Faraday looked at Marisol across the table with the specific look of someone checking whether she'd caught what he'd caught, and she gave him the smallest possible nod because yes, she had, and the joke wasn't actually a joke. He looked away. But for a half-second he looked almost relieved. In the car going back, she said, "Benedict's pulling funds out of the Vancouver operation." Faraday didn't answer immediately. "That's what the joke was about," she said. "He's not worried because he's already moved his exposure. He's out by the end of Q4. You got that from a dinner joke." "I got that from the way he ordered his wine," she said, "and the joke. And the thing Albrecht didn't say when he finished talking." There was a silence. "That's the 2nd time this month you've told me something I already knew," Faraday said, in a way that made me realize I didn't actually know it. Marisol looked out the window at the city moving past. The lights were doing their winter Vancouver thing, blurred by the rain, scattered, beautiful in a cold and indifferent way that she'd always privately loved about this city. "Are you complaining?" "No," he said. "Good," she said. Another silence. A different one, not uncomfortable exactly, but aware of itself. "Your contract is month to month," Faraday said. "I know. I'd like to discuss longer terms." "Okay," she said. She meant it. She was surprised to find how much she meant it. She didn't ask him why. She already understood that in this particular equation, why was usually a thing that resolved itself if you were patient enough to wait for all the variables. What Marisol hadn't anticipated was the Thursday she came in at 7 a.m. and found Faraday's office door open and 3 men she didn't recognize standing in it with the kind of stillness that meant something had gone very wrong somewhere. She did not stop walking. She went to her office, closed the door, and opened the Meridian accounts. The gap was back. Not skimming this time. Something larger, Something that had moved in 3 separate transactions over the past 48 hours, each one a different entity, each one timed for when a different person would have been watching. Whoever had done it understood how the architecture worked. They understood it well. Her hands were very steady. She'd noticed that about herself in moments like this, the moments when everything should shake. Her hands didn't. They just got quieter. She mapped the transactions. All 3. She traced them back through 2 shell structures to an account she recognized. Benedict. His signature, the way you develop a signature in numbers without knowing it. The same preference for round amounts, the same almost invisible marker she'd seen in his transaction pattern at dinner. She printed nothing. She saved it to a drive. She locked the drive in her desk drawer, the one with the actual key, not the push lock. Then she went and knocked on Faraday's office door. The 3 men looked at her. Faraday looked at her. "Sorry to interrupt," she said. "When you have 5 minutes." His expression didn't change. "Now works," he said, and the 3 men, without a word, left. Marisol came in. She pulled the chair across from his desk and sat down, which she had never done before. She told him what she'd found. All of it. The amounts, the entities, the timing, the signature. She told him in the order she'd found it, because that was the order that made the logic visible, and when she finished, she put the drive on the desk between them. Faraday looked at the drive. He looked at her. "You traced this in?" He glanced at his watch. 43 minutes. "Why didn't you call me on my cell?" "Because your door was open and you had company and I didn't know who the company was." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had started again, doing its best against the windows. "The company," he said, "is handling a different problem. A related one, it turns out. Benedict." "Benedict," he confirmed. "He's been planning this for a while," Marisol said. "The dinner, the joke, he was comfortable. He felt like he'd already gotten away with it. That kind of comfortable takes time to build." Faraday picked up the drive, turned it over once, put it in his jacket pocket. "I owe you something," he said. "You pay me very well. Beyond that." She looked at him. The scar, the circles under his eyes, the jacket that was still slightly wrong across the shoulder in the way of someone who spent a lot of time moving fast. She had spent 4 months watching this man from the side of her eye, cataloguing the small thing the way she catalogued everything. Not because she meant to, just because that was how her mind worked. Pattern recognition, ledgers. What was present and what was missing. What she'd read in his ledger was a person who had built a very careful life out of being a very precise kind of dangerous, and who had, somewhere along the way, stopped expecting people to be competent, and started expecting them to be tolerable instead. She had, apparently, recalibrated something. "Don't owe me things," she said. "Just, if you find out what Benedict does with money he takes, tell me. I want to understand the full pattern." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. She stood up. She was almost to the door when he said, "Marisol." First name. First time she stopped, but she didn't turn around. "The longer contract," he said. "If you want it." She did. She knew she did, and she knew he knew it, and she knew that both of them were aware of exactly how much that meant in the particular arithmetic of the world they were now undeniably sharing. "Send me the terms," she said. "I'll review them." "You always do," he said. She went back to her office. She sat down. She opened her spreadsheet, the one that said Job Search Tracker at the top, still from the very first day, and looked at the rows. 11 applications. 1 response. She highlighted the whole thing and deleted it. Outside, Vancouver was doing what Vancouver does in November. Rain against the glass, mountains gone behind the cloud, the city smaller and closer and somehow more like itself than it ever was in the light. She'd always liked it this way, the part of the city that didn't perform for anyone. She opened a new spreadsheet. At the top, in the same bold font she always used, she typed, "Meridian, full transaction history, Q3 to present." She started at the beginning. The numbers never lied. You just had to know what they were actually saying.